She found his horses. He found a reason to ride again. The gate was open when I came back from town. I stood at the truck and looked at it a long time before I walked over. The latch was rusted, the chain hanging loose, and the post leaning at the angle it had been leaning since March. I'd meant to fix it. I'd meant to do a lot of things. I walked the fence line out to the east pasture and then down into the draw, and I already knew. 3 sets of tracks in the soft clay by the creek, the grass bent where they'd pushed through the willow scrub and out toward the county road. I stood there with my hands at my sides and I didn't feel much of anything. That was the trouble with those months. Not the grief exactly, grief I could have worked with, but the nothing underneath it. The flat gray of a day that doesn't care what you do or don't. I went back to the house. I ate a can of beans cold because I hadn't lit the stove. I went to bed at 6:30. Clara had picked those horses, not in the way people say it like a footnote. She had driven 3 hours to a ranch in Presidio County and stood in the pen with all 4 of them and come home with exactly the one she wanted. Copperhead, which she named for his color and his temper, and the gray mare she called Mist, and the young paint she'd never quite finished naming. She'd gotten them 2 springs before she got sick. She rode Mist 3 times a week until the last fall she had. After, I kept them because they were hers. Then the gate was open and they were gone, and I didn't go look. That's what I'm telling you, I didn't go look. My neighbor Denny Foss came by 2 days later to ask if I'd seen a woman with a horse trailer parked out on the Vasquez Road, because she'd been there since dawn and he didn't recognize her truck. I said no, and he left, and I went back inside and sat in the chair I'd been sitting in. She came to my door that evening. I heard the truck first, then boots on the porch steps, not tentative, not a polite knock of somebody who isn't sure they belong, a solid knock, the kind you'd knock on a door you expected to open. I wasn't going to answer it. I sat in the chair another minute, then I got up. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Clara always said I had the manners of a man who'd been raised right even when he was trying to pretend he hadn't. She was standing on the porch with her hat in her hand and her hair dark with sweat. She had the kind of face that doesn't perform anything, no practiced sympathy, no careful expression. She looked at me and said, "You've got 3 horses about 6 miles east of here. Found them in a mesquite break off the Vasquez Road this morning, eating somebody's alfalfa. Your brand's an H/C on the left hip." "H-Barcy," I said. "All right. They're tied at my trailer down the road. I didn't know whose they were and I didn't want them getting on the highway." I looked at her. She looked back. She had a cut on her left hand, dried and dark, and dust on her collar. "You roped them," I said. "The 2 mares I walked. The gelding took a while. The paint he would have." Clara had said he needed another year. He'd always been particular about who touched him. "I'll get my keys," I said. "I've got the trailer," she said. "Makes more sense for me to bring them to you." I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy to argue, and she was right besides. Her name was Nell Archer. She'd bought the Ray's place, 40 acres on the other side of the Vasquez Road, an old spread with a deteriorated stock barn and a house that needed a roof. She'd moved out from Odessa 3 weeks ago. She told me this in the time it took to load my horses into my pen, plain facts given without any need for me to receive them with particular warmth. The horses she handled quietly. Copperhead she watched. Mist she loaded with a hand on the neck. The paint, she stepped into his space and made him look at her before she walked him forward, and he went. I watched her do that. "You know horses," I said. "I had a husband who did. Some of it rubbed off." I didn't ask about the husband. She didn't ask about Clara's name on the gate post, which I'd put up 2 autumns ago and never taken down. She said good night and drove out, and I stood in the pen for a while with the 3 of them. Copperhead had a scratch on his flank from the mesquite. The paint was agitated still, walking the fence. Mist came to me and put her nose against my chest and stood there, and I put my hand up on her neck and felt her breathe. I fixed the gate the next morning. Not because of Nell Archer, or not only, But I was out there with the fence pliers and the new chain before the sun was full up, and while I worked I noticed the water trough was low and the east fence had 3 more posts that wanted resetting, and I noticed these things in a way I hadn't noticed anything in a long time. Like the land had detail again. Like it was worth the trouble of looking at. I didn't go introduce myself to her. That wasn't something I was going to do. She came back 12 days later because she needed to borrow a post-hole digger and didn't want to drive to town. I lent it to her. She brought it back the next afternoon and stayed maybe 20 minutes, long enough to drink a cup of coffee on the porch steps because I hadn't asked her inside and she hadn't made a thing of it. She told me her roof was worse than she'd thought, and that the previous owner had done repairs with a material she described in terms I won't repeat. I laughed. First time I'd laughed since I couldn't remember. She didn't make anything of that either. That was her way. She didn't watch me to see how I was doing. She didn't treat me like a man who needed to be handled carefully. She talked to me the way you'd talk to a person you expected to still be standing there when you finished the sentence. I started sleeping better. Not well, but better. 6 hours instead of 4. I got up before light and fed the horses and walked the fence line, and one morning about a month after she'd returned them, I caught myself thinking about riding. Not thinking about Clara riding, which was what those horses had become, just her, just the shape of her absence, but thinking about saddling Copperhead and going out past the creek before it got hot. I thought about it for about 3 seconds, and then I didn't do it and I made coffee and that was that. But I'd thought it. There was a stretch of weeks in late August where the temperature didn't drop below 90, even at night. I was putting up a shade structure on the south side of the barn, and she came by with a length of tin roofing she'd had left over and didn't need. I told her I hadn't asked for it. She said she knew and left it leaning against the fence. 2 days later I used it. The shade it threw was exactly right. Sometime in September I found out her husband had died 3 years ago. A man named Archer, a quarter-horse man out of Pecos County. She mentioned him the way you mention weather, not to burden you with it, but because it was simply part of the geography of her life, and she wasn't ashamed of it and didn't require your sympathy. He'd had a heart attack at 58 while loading hay. She'd sold everything and sat still for 2 years and then bought the Ray's place. She'd wanted land again. She'd wanted the work of it. I understood that. The evening I found that out, I went to the barn and I took Copperhead's saddle down from the rack and I cleaned and oiled it. Just the saddle. I put it back, but I'd had it in my hands. She came for dinner once in October. I'd asked her, or I'd said there was a pot of chili on the stove if she hadn't eaten, which was as close as I could get. She came and we ate at the table, and she did not once look at the chair that still had Clara's sweater folded over the back of it. Not because she didn't see it, because she gave me the courtesy of its belonging to me. After we sat on the porch. The night was cool and the stars were sharp. She had her coffee and I had mine and we didn't talk for a long time. She said, "You ever ride any more?" "Not since last fall," I said. She didn't say anything to that. Not, "You should," or "She would have wanted you to," or any of the things people say that make you feel the shape of what you've lost more than you wanted to write then. She just turned her coffee cup in her hands. "The Gray's a good horse," she said finally. "She is." We sat another while, and then she went home. I don't know what it was. The way she said it, maybe, the plain way, like she was just talking about a horse, or the way she'd sat there with me in the quiet without filling it up. I went to bed and I lay there and I thought, in the morning I'm going to ride. I got up at 5. I saddled Mist in the dark. I knew where everything was by touch and had for 30 years. And I led her out into the yard and I stood beside her for a minute with my hand on the saddle horn. It's a particular thing, getting back on a horse after you've been away from it. There's a moment before you swing up where you're aware of all the time that's passed. All of it. I got on. We walked out east in the gray before sunrise, Mist and me, through the pasture and down through the draw where the creek runs thin this time of year, and then up the ridge to where you can see the Chinati peaks if the air is clear, which it was. The paint, back in the pen, had called after us. Copperhead had ignored us entirely. Mist went steady under me, the way she always had, like she was glad of the purpose. I won't tell you it wasn't hard. There were a few minutes up on that ridge where I had to just sit still. Grief doesn't leave on any particular schedule. It was still there. But it had moved over enough to make room for something else, for the cold air, for the horse under me, for the pale orange starting to come up behind the mountains. I rode back at full light. Nell's truck was at my gate. She'd come over early, I found out later, to bring back a wrench she'd borrowed and found the barn open and the saddle gone and had waited, just to be sure. She was leaning against the fence when I came through the gate. She had her arms crossed against the cold, and she was watching me come in. I pulled up and she looked at me and she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The kind of woman she was, the kind that pulls a man's scattered horses out of a mesquite break in the July heat and cuts her hand on a rope and doesn't ask you to be grateful. She just looked at me the way she always did, like I was somebody who was going to be all right. I stepped down. She took Mist's reins while I unsaddled, and then she held the gate while I turned the mare out. Her hand was warm where it brushed mine on the latch, and she left it there a moment, not tenderly, just with the weight of it, and then we walked to the house. I lit the stove. She put the coffee on. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. There's a thing that happens when you've been empty long enough and then someone fills in not the whole of it. Nothing fills the whole of it, but enough. Enough that you get up before light and saddle a horse. Enough that the land has detail again. Enough that you sit down to breakfast in your own kitchen, and it's not just something to get through. Nell didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. She'd have laughed at the idea, and so would I. But she showed up when the gate was open and brought back what was mine, and then she stayed near enough that I had a reason to stay near myself. That's not a small thing. I'm not sure it's anything less than everything. The paint was finally named that winter. His name is Ford. Nell picked it. She didn't ask, just said it one morning while she was watching him. That one's a Ford, and I said all right, and it stuck, and I don't think Clara would have minded. She wouldn't have minded any of it. She would have liked Nell Archer. That's the truth. She would have known her for exactly what she was, a woman who doesn't waste much, doesn't perform much, and doesn't leave when it gets hard. A woman who stands in a pasture and decides which horses to trust and is usually right. There are things I don't talk about. I'm not built for it. But I'm riding most mornings now, and there's a woman across the Vasquez Road with a bad roof that I helped put right in November. And in the evenings sometimes her light is on when I come back from the barn, and I look at it. That's enough. For now, that's more than enough.